Hello, everyone. No. God, no. God, no. What was that? What was that? Hello, everyone. Welcome to Pride Perspectives. For those who have heard this show before, you'll notice that I'm actually talking and not using AI hosts. The original idea behind them, and the show in general, is to leverage AI to keep the show as unbiased as possible. If you wanted biased information, you can go find Fox News or the Young Turks. I'm not going to stop you. I care about finding out what really happened in transgender history and news, and you're definitely not going to find that watching One Nation News. I want to give you what happened, even when the information doesn't make us as transgender people look good. That's the case with the subject of today's show. That being said, if having me on the show instead of the two AI hosts is better, let me know with a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel, or even leave me comments. And as always, sources are in the description. Today's show is about a teenager before they were emperor, before they were a scandal. They were a child of the desert, born around the year 203 AD in the Roman province of Syria, in the bustling city of Emesa, known today as Homs. Their birth name was Sextus Varius Vitus Basinus, but that is not the name that history remembers. They would come to be called Elagabalus, after the god that they served, not as a priest, but as a living conduit of the divine. The cult of Elagabal was centered on a sacred meteorite, a black stone that had fallen from the sky and was believed to embody the sun god himself. This wasn't metaphorical. The god was the stone, and it was housed in a lavish temple, and the high priest wasn't just a functionary, they were the god's chosen vessel. Basinus was that vessel, made high priest of Elagabal at a very young age, perhaps as early as 8 or 9 years old. Now imagine, clad in silks, golden robes, and elaborate cosmetics, a child moving through the temple, through smoke and incense, adored by followers as both divine and human. Even before Rome, there was something deeply theatrical about Elagabalus's life. That boundary between God and mortal, between man and woman, between child and ruler, was always blurred. But the divine favor was not enough. That family had lost its imperial standing, and one woman was absolutely determined to change that. Julia Maesa. That name's important. Julia Maesa, sister of the late Empress Julia Domna and aunt of the murdered Emperor Carriker. Julia Maesa absolutely refused to fade into obscurity. When the Emperor Macrinus, the first man who had ever risen to power from the equestrian class, seized the throne, Maesa saw her chance. She made a shocking claim that her grandson, Basinus, was, in fact, the illegitimate son of Caracalla. It was political fiction, or at least it was a convenient political fiction. But in the Roman eyes, even the whisper of imperial blood could be enough for them. Maesa was brilliant. She didn't just sell her grandson as an emperor, she sold them as a god. To the Eastern legions who revered the god Elagabal, this wasn't a child in robes. This was divine legitimacy. With Maesa's immense wealth, she had bought the loyalty of Lego Gallica, who was stationed over in Syria. and what followed was less of a civil war and more of a religious uprising. In May of 218, just north of Antioch, Elagabalus's forces met those of Emperor Macrinus. In a swift and brutal clash, the boy priest's troops emerged victorious. Macrinus was captured and executed. The Senate, powerless to resist the military tide, had absolutely no choice but to confirm the absolute unthinkable. In the summer of 219 AD, the city of Rome bore witness to a spectacle unlike anything that it had seen before. At just 14 years old, Elagabalus, a gender non-conforming teenager from the edge of the empire, became Emperor of Rome. The new emperor didn't arrive as a man of state, but as a high priest of the sun. Again, imagine, draped in gold, eyes painted, and surrounded by Syrian eunuchs and temple dancers, Elagabalus marched through the capital, bringing their god with them. The Roman world was absolutely unprepared. This wasn't just some provincial boy from the east. This was someone who arrived already with a different cosmology altogether, a different kind of power, one rooted in religious ecstasy and not the senatorial tradition that they were used to. It must have been both electrifying and absolutely terrifying, because imagine, you're a Roman senator steeped in centuries of Jupiter and Mars and solemn civic rituals, and suddenly there's this teenager who rides into town claiming not only to be Caesar, but also the embodiment of a foreign deity, dragging a rock from the east that he expects everyone to worship. It's more than just culture shock. It is a declaration of war on Roman tradition. Elagabalus ordered the construction of a massive new temple on Palatine Hill, the sacred heart of the Roman religion. And the goal was to install the god Elagabal as supreme, absorbing all the other gods, even Jupiter, the king of the Roman pantheon. This wasn't religious diplomacy. In Elagabalus's theology, all gods had to submit to the sun. It was a theological coup, and one with very real political consequences, because to Rome's elite, this was more than just blasphemy. It was destabilization. But religion was only the beginning. Elagabalus's personal life, too, defied every Roman norm. They had married 5 times to both women and men. One of their wives was a Vestal Virgin, a sacred priestess sworn to 30 years of chastity, and to defile her vow was considered a capital offense. This was taboo on an absolutely cosmic level. The Vestals weren't just celibate, they were vessels of Rome's safety and purity. To marry one was like spitting on the city's gods. But for Elagabalus, Rome's gods were already obsolete, and their love life became absolutely political spectacle. They took male lovers openly, including a charioteer named Hercules, whom Elagabalus allegedly referred to as their husband. Perhaps the most striking and most contentious are the accounts that suggested Elagabalus wanted to be a woman. He had asked the physicians to contrive a woman's vagina in his body by means of an incision. That is from Cassius Dio, Rome History, Book 80. To ask for gender-affirming surgery in the 3rd century is extraordinary. Whether the story was literal, metaphorical, or politically exaggerated, the intent was unmistakable. Elagabalus did not see themselves as male. They demanded to be addressed with feminine titles, not just emperor, but empress, lady, and wife. They were said to offer gold to any doctor who could make them physically female, and to some, That was the ravings of a mad monarch. To others, there was something more. When a teenager in power dresses as a woman, marries men, calls herself queen, and pleads for surgery, we should not ask whether she had the right words. We should ask, what was she trying to become? Elagabalus didn't identify as a woman in the modern sense of the word, but they definitely lived as one. That's not a boy in a dress. That is trans-feminine identity, unapologetically enacted. But the empire had its limits, and Elagabalus had crossed all of them. Religious heresy, sexual scandal, gender nonconformity, and worst of all, the biggest sin of all, unpredictability. The real problem was power. Rome could forgive decadence up to a point, but when that decadence disrupts the army, the Senate, the public order, you become expendable. In 222 AD, after just 4 years on the throne, Elagabalus was assassinated by the Praetorian Guard. Their body, along with that of their mother, was dragged through the streets, mutilated, and dumped in the Tiber River. When Elagabalus died, the Roman Senate declared damnatio memoriae, a condemnation of memory. Their name was scratched from monuments, their portraits defaced, their temples rededicated. They tried to erase them. This was Rome's version of cancel culture. But like all acts of erasure, it was also a confession, a sign of how much they'd shaken the empire. And yet, their story survived, in scandal, in satire, in whispered legend. Over the centuries, artists and writers couldn't look away. Elagabalus became a symbol of decadence, sure, but also of freedom, danger, and self-creation. They haunted the Western imagination. They were vilified, exoticized, but never truly forgotten. Now, in the 21st century, new voices are reclaiming the story. Not as a joke or as a tragedy, but as a revolution in gender, power, and possibility. Elagabalus wasn't ahead of their time. They were of their time, and still they broke the mold. Gender diversity is not a fad. It's not new. It is absolutely ancient, and it will continue to go on. Across 2 millennia, empires rose and fell, but Elagabalus' story remains, not in marble or myth, but in memory.